It is 2 in the morning, and the sound that wakes you up is not a bark. It is smaller than that. A wet, rhythmic, almost polite sound coming from the floor by the bed, and you already know what it is before you turn on the light. Your dog is working on his front paw again, the same one, the same spot, over and over. And when you finally get the lamp on, you see the fur there is stained a rust brown that was not there a year ago. That was my dog, a stiff-hipped old shepherd mix named Zeke. And that was me, lying there doing the math on how many nights this had been going on. If you have already spent a few of those nights searching this yourself, you have probably landed on a cone, a medicated shampoo, and an appointment reminder to let the professionals sort it out. All of it treating the paw like the whole story, when the paw is really just the last stop on a chain that started somewhere else. See the whole chain and it stops being a mystery. Nobody at the front counter of your vet's office is going to say this part outright. The $80 shot they just sold you, the one you will be back for every month or two for the rest of his life, does not touch the reason he is licking. It turns the itch signal off, full stop, while the actual cause sits in his gut, in the bag you have poured into his bowl for years, quietly getting worse. There is a $2 fix sitting in most kitchens that does more for the real problem than that injection ever will, and I am going to hand you the exact protocol, along with the one detail that decided whether it worked for a golden retriever named Waffles, or just wasted 2 weeks of her owner's time. But you need the whole picture first, because the $2 is the easy part. Why your dog needs it at all is the part they buried. Stay with me even if you are 3 vet visits deep into this already, even if your dog has been on the pill or the shot for a year, and you have quietly made peace with the idea that this is just who he is now. It is not who he is. It is what has been in his bowl. Let's do the actual math on doing it their way, because these numbers sound reasonable one at a time and add up to something else entirely. The pill runs somewhere between $30 and $90 a month, depending on your dog's weight. The injection, given every 4 to 8 weeks, runs $50 to $150 a visit, which puts a mid-sized dog somewhere around $600 to $2,400 a year every year for as long as he lives, because neither drug is built to end. And that is the mild version of this story. I have talked to owners whose dogs stopped responding to the pill after a year or two, same as mine did, who got referred to a dermatologist and handed a second prescription on top of it. Something stronger, an immune suppressant north of $100 a month by itself. One woman living on a fixed income told me flatly she could not keep affording it and felt like she was being sold further and further from an actual answer every time she walked back through that door. Another owner in a completely different city described almost the identical cycle, a different dog, the same steroid shot, the same derm referral, the same sense that nobody was ever going to look past the symptom on purpose. That is what the system is actually built to produce. Meanwhile, the fix I am about to walk you through costs about what you would spend on a coffee. I did not always know any of this. For years, I fed the bag everybody feeds, the one with the shiny, healthy-looking dog on the front. And when Zeke's licking started, I did exactly what I was told. Elimination shampoo, a course of antibiotics for a hot spot that came right back. Then the pill, which worked, genuinely worked, for about 3 weeks until the vet suggested we step up to the shot instead. The ingredient panel on the bag never once came up. The reason I even thought to ask goes back further than Zeke. To a stretch of my 20s, I spent living out on the Mongolian steppe, working alongside herding families whose whole relationship with their dogs ran on nothing I recognized from home. A bag of anything for a dog would have meant a multi-day ride to the nearest town and back, so it simply never entered the picture. Dogs worked a herd from 4 months old until they were gray in the muzzle and stiff in the hips, and somehow their feet were the last thing anyone worried about. I spent a stretch of one winter with a herder named Gonzarik, out past Arkhangai where the grass thins into scrub and the wind comes down off the ridge hard enough to make your eyes water. His dog slept curled against the felt wall of the jur at night, close enough to the dung fire that their coats smelled of smoke by morning. And in the mornings the cold was sharp enough that the water bucket by the door had skinned over with ice. One of them, a big rough-coated male named Boar, came in one evening from moving sheep and just flopped straight into the dirt to sleep. No chewing at his own feet, no fussing at anything. I asked Ganzorik, mostly out of idle curiosity, whether his dogs ever licked themselves raw the way I had watched dogs do back home. He looked at me like it was a strange thing to ask a man who had never once bought a bag of anything for a dog in his life. Then he said the one line I still think about every time I watch a dog work at its own foot. A dog that eats real food does not poison itself from the inside. I filed that away for years, honestly, more as a memory than a piece of information, until Zeke's paw sent me looking for someone who might actually know something, and a neighbor pointed me toward a guy named Warren. Warren spent 3 decades as a veterinary technician before he got sick enough of the industry to open a little holistic pet supply shop out of a converted garage a few towns over. Shelves of dusty glass jars and a fridge full of raw diet trial packs, a hand-lettered sign by the register that just says, "Ask me anything." The first time I brought Zeke in, Warren did not reach for a product off the shelf. He got down on the concrete floor, picked up Zeke's paw, and told me to smell it myself. I thought he was joking. He was not. Down between the pads, the fur smelled sweet and faintly musty, almost exactly like a bag of corn chips left open too long on the counter. Warren said that smell has a name in his world. It is the smell of an overgrown yeast called malassea, a fungus that lives on every dog's skin in small, harmless amounts and turns into a real infection the moment the conditions tip in its favor. Every dog that walks through that door with stained paws, he told me, wiping his hands on his jeans, smells like a bag of Fritos before I even get a good look at the fur. He said it so plainly, like a mechanic naming a sound an engine makes, that it took me a second to realize how much it explained. Warren pulled a paper towel off a roll by the sink, wet a corner of it, and rubbed it against Zeke's pad hard enough to leave a faint brown smear on the white paper. He held it up like evidence. That is what 2 years of licking looks like when you actually go looking for it instead of just handing over a card and booking the next appointment. His explanation, which he had watched play out on hundreds of dogs coming through that garage over the years, tracks with what the actual veterinary literature will tell you if you get past the first page of search results. A carbohydrate-heavy kibble, and plenty of the expensive ones are just as guilty as the cheap ones, is loaded with corn, wheat, potato, pea, or rice as filler. Those starches break down into sugar in the gut, yeast feeds on sugar. A dog whose gut runs a steady sugar load is going to carry a heavier yeast burden than a dog whose diet was never built that way. And that yeast does not stay put. It shows up on the skin, in the ears, and especially in the damp, dark space between the paw pads. About the most hospitable piece of real estate on a dog's whole body for a fungus looking to move in. The licking is your dog trying to fix, with the only tool he has, a problem you cannot see. I will not dress that mechanism up as something it is not, and I will not pretend it is the whole answer for every dog either, because it is not. Some dogs lick at their paws over a grass allergy, a dust mite, a reaction to something in the yard that has nothing to do with what is in the bowl. And if you clean up the diet completely and the licking barely moves, that is real information too, not a failure on your part. What I can tell you is that food and environmental allergies together sit at the top of the documented real list of causes behind chronic paw licking, that veterinary dermatologists themselves treat removing the trigger, not just numbing the reaction to it, as the actual gold standard whichever kind of trigger it turns out to be, and that Warren, the herders, and a whole community of owners who changed the food and watched the licking fade all arrived at the same conclusion independently, the hard way, dog by dog. That is the kind of proof that does not need a lab coat behind it. It is also why an elimination trial, cutting one thing out at a time and watching what actually changes, still beats guessing, whether what you are eliminating is a filler grain or the grass along the back fence. This next part made me genuinely angry once I understood it in full, and I do not throw that word around lightly on this channel. The company behind the shot is called Zoetis, which used to be Pfizer's animal health division before it was spun off into its own corporation in 2013. That same year, Zoetis got its pill approved by the FDA, the first drug of its kind ever cleared for dogs, a fast itch suppressant that turns the signal off at the brain instead of fixing anything underneath. The injectable version followed a few years later through a separate track entirely, cleared not by the FDA but by the USDA as a veterinary biologic, which gave Zoetis a second product doing the same basic job on a different billing schedule. Since that spinoff, the company has grown from roughly $4 billion a year in revenue to more than $9 billion, and allergy management is one of the biggest categories carrying that growth. Advertised straight to owners the same way a human allergy pill gets advertised, which is not how veterinary medicine used to be sold at all. 20 years ago, you found out what your dog needed from your vet, full stop. Now you find out from a commercial with a golden retriever running through a field, and you walk into the appointment already asking for the drug by name, which is exactly the outcome an advertising budget that size is built to produce. This is a business model, laid out plainly in their own numbers, and a business model built on a drug that manages a symptom forever will always out-earn one built on a $2 fix that ends the problem in 3 weeks. I sat at my own kitchen table one night with the folded paperwork that came with Zeke's pill bottle, actually reading it instead of throwing it in the drawer like usual. Down in the fine print, the company admits a concurrent yeast, bacterial, or mite infection can keep the drug from working as well as it should, which is their own quiet acknowledgement that an untreated fungal problem is commonly riding along with the itch they are charging you to suppress. A separate line down the page cautions that the drug may affect the body's ability to fight off tumors, serious enough language that the company itself flags it for anyone paying attention, sitting right next to the reason it is not approved at all for puppies under a year old, which trial data tied to a different risk entirely, elevated rates of a mite disease called demodicosis and pneumonia at higher doses. 2 separate warnings, both real, both sitting quietly in paperwork most owners never unfold, both a lot harder to find than the smiling dog on the box. None of this is new, and that is the part that should make you angriest of all. Dogs ate real food, off the table, off the herd, off whatever the household had, for essentially the entire span of time dogs have existed alongside people, curled at the edge of the fire since long before anyone thought to put food in a bag at all. Roman shepherds fed their farm dogs barley soaked in whey. Greek flock guardians ate the same scraps as the household. None of that is unique to one corner of the world. It is just what a dog ate everywhere, until very recently. Your grandfather's dog, if you had the kind of grandfather who kept one on a farm, almost certainly never touched a bag in its life and still worked the property into old age. The extruded, shelf-stable kibble sitting in your pantry right now is a mid-20th century invention, a way to turn cheap grain mill leftovers into a shippable product after wartime metal rationing made canned dog food harder to produce and pushed everybody toward dry food out of necessity rather than nutrition. That habit stuck around long after the war ended because it was cheap and convenient, and the whole thing got to keep calling itself complete and balanced on the label because that phrase is defined by an industry association of feed regulators, not tested and enforced the way a food safety agency would, which is exactly how a bag built mostly of starch filler gets to sit on a shelf looking like medicine. 2 generations later, most owners have never once questioned whether the bag itself might be the reason their dog cannot leave his own feet alone. Feeding a dog real food was never fringe. It was normal for most of history, and the bag is the recent arrival in that story. There is a version of this story that never even makes it to a bottle of pills, and it comes down to the vet, not as a villain, just as a man working inside a system that squeezes his appointment slots tighter every year. Most of them got into the work because they actually like dogs. But the 15 minutes he has with yours gets paid for by the visit and the refill, never by the 10 minutes it would take to sit down with you and go through what is actually in the bag on your counter. Nobody trains a vet to read an ingredient panel out loud to a worried owner, because there is no line item for that on the invoice, and nutrition gets a fraction of the classroom time in veterinary school that pharmacology does. So he was mostly never handed the other half of the answer either. The system does not need anyone in a white coat to be dishonest for this to keep happening. It just needs the incentive to point one direction and leave it there. Maybe the dog doing this in your house is 13 or 14, paws stained dark, a cone of shame gathering dust somewhere in a closet because it never actually fixed anything. A dog's gut and skin can still recalibrate at that age once you take away what has been feeding the problem, so none of what follows is a young dog only window. It moves slower in an older body, so judge it in weeks, not days. But the clock you are actually racing is the one on the next refill, not the one on his age, and that one you control starting today. The actual protocol is not a vague gesture at eating better, and it is the same one that finally worked for Waffles once someone caught the one detail she had been missing, which I will get to in a minute. The first move is cutting the carbohydrate load. That does not mean an expensive prescription bag. It means reading the ingredient list on whatever you already feed and either switching towards something genuinely low in corn, wheat, potato, and pea filler, or moving toward home-cooked or raw meals built around real meat. Alongside that, add a plain pet-specific probiotic containing a strain called Saccharomyces boulardii, which is a yeast itself, but one that competes against Malassea rather than feeding it, plus a basic digestive enzyme supplement. Both run well under $20 a month at any decent pet supply store. And Warren told me most dogs he has walked through this show a real shift in gut health inside 3 to 4 weeks. That is the whole point of doing it this way instead of the shot. You are ending it, not managing it forever, and the moment it ends, you stop paying for it, which is the independence the $80 injection was never built to hand you. There is no auto refill on real food. There is no monthly reminder text from the clinic. You just stop needing it, and that is precisely the outcome the other business model cannot afford to sell you. That handles the inside. The outside is where your $2 comes in. Plain apple cider vinegar, the raw, unfiltered kind with the cloudy strands floating in the bottom, sometimes labeled with the mother, costs about $2 for a bottle that lasts weeks. Mix 1 part vinegar to 2 parts warm water in a shallow basin, or 1 part to 4 if the paws are already red and raw, because full strength on broken skin will sting him and he will not hold still for it. Have him stand in it for a full 5 minutes, not 3, not 10. That window is long enough for the acidity to shift the skin's pH against the yeast, and past that point you are not gaining anything, just soaking his feet for the sake of it. Do that once a day for a week, and give it the full week before you judge whether it is working. A single soak or 2 tells you nothing either way, the same as one skipped dose of the shot would tell you nothing about whether the shot works. For a dog whose skin is already inflamed and angry, rather than just discolored, some owners swap in a weak licorice root tincture instead, roughly half a milliliter for every 20 pounds of dog, twice a day for no more than 10 to 14 days, since it behaves like a gentle natural version of a steroid on the skin. One real caution on that one, worth taking seriously. Licorice root can affect blood pressure, so skip it entirely if your dog is already on blood pressure medication and ask before combining it with anything else. For a genuinely stubborn case, where the smell is strong and the redness has spread past one toe, add an over-the-counter antifungal cream. The same class sold in the human foot fungal aisle. Rub thin between the pads twice a day for a full 3 weeks even after it looks clear, because stopping the moment the symptom disappears is exactly how these infections come roaring back. This is the single detail that separates an owner who says this worked from one who says it did nothing. You have to dry the paws completely afterward, every crease between every pad, with a towel or a few seconds of a cool hairdryer on low. Leave any dampness behind and you have just built the yeast a better home than it had before you started, a warm, wet pocket with nowhere to go, and the entire soak works against you instead of for you. Warren watched this exact detail play out with Waffles, a golden retriever whose owner had already spent close to 2 years cycling between the pill and the shot, before anyone looked past the itch itself. She tried the vinegar soaks on her own first, without Warren, and quit after 4 days convinced they were pointless. What she had actually skipped was the towel, every single time, so the paws stayed damp and the yeast never lost its foothold. Once Warren caught that and had her drying each paw fully after every soak, on top of the same diet and probiotic changes, Waffles' paws went from that dark rust stain back to their normal color inside a single month. She was not on a single medication by the time Warren told me the story. There was simply nothing left to lick at. I will give you the safety boundary the same plain way Gonzorek would have given it to me. No hedging, because a channel built on distrust of the system still owes you the truth about when the system is genuinely necessary. A paw that is swollen hot to the touch, bleeding, or a dog suddenly refusing to bear weight on it is past what a soak and a diet change can handle. That is not a yeast problem anymore. That could be an abscess, something lodged between the pads, or a break, and no herder on that step would have pretended otherwise. Not out of any training, just out of having watched enough dogs to know the difference in his bones. A dog favoring one leg entirely, or a paw that looks worse after 3 or 4 days of the soak instead of better, has crossed out of what this protocol was ever meant to handle, and pushing through anyway out of stubbornness is its own kind of harm. Pretending a $2 soak fixes absolutely everything would be its own kind of dishonesty, and this channel does not deal in that either. That is the whole arc of this, and it is worth sitting with. Dogs were kept sound on real food for as long as dogs and people have known each other, and somewhere in the last 70 or so years, a bag of grain meal byproduct convinced an entire country this was the only safe way to feed a dog. Right around the same stretch of history, a second industry figured out how to sell a monthly fix for the exact problem the first one was quietly causing. It was never your fault. You were not a bad owner for feeding the bag. Every single one of us did, myself included, for years before a herder on the other side of the world said one sentence that finally made me ask what was actually in it. Zeke is 15 now. His hips still creak going up the porch steps, and some mornings he needs a minute before he commits to standing up all the way. But he sleeps through the night. No 2 in the morning wake-up call, no wet rhythmic sound from the floor by the bed, just an old dog breathing slow and even in the dark, the way Boar used to sleep by that dung fire on the other side of the world, like there was nothing left to fight off. The old dog asleep at your feet right now, stiff hips and all, can still get some of those years back, starting with what is already sitting in your kitchen cabinet. If this is the first time anyone laid it out for you this plainly, tell me in the comments what you have already tried and what it cost you, because I read every one of them and it shapes what I dig into next. There are a lot of owners in that comment section who have been exactly where you are at 2 in the morning, and it helps to hear you are not the only one who felt talked in circles. And if you are done funding a subscription for a problem that has a $2 answer and you want to know what else got buried the same way, subscribe. There is more of this I have not told you yet. More of what the herders knew that never made it into a single bag or a single bottle, and your dog has earned the version of this story that actually ends.